Today we're going to be talking about the top tips about flipping properties, top tips when flipping properties. So it should be a really exciting session. I'd like to just first of all say thank you very much for tuning in and taking the time today to actually listen in. It is really, really appreciated for that you guys actually listen in. And hopefully you guys get a lot of value on what we're going to be covering today. So first thing that we're going to be covering all around essentially how you can make lumps of cash through investing in property. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Is firstly, what is a flip? Okay, what is a flip deal? Second thing is different buying options. So how can you buy flips? How's the best way to do it? Third thing is flipping areas. Then also you're going to be looking at flips versus buy-to-lets. So how do you know which is which? Now that's a pretty big thing. And then also, so what areas work well? So where are you investing in? Is that area a good area to be investing? Okay, Kevin, I don't see any of the chat on these. Can you scroll so I can see chat, please? Okay. So if you click on the Katana group, no, on Facebook, click on the Katana group. Kev, on Facebook, please click on the Katana group limited one. Yes, thank you, because it's directly feeding into there. Okay, excellent. And then I should be able to see the chat within that. Close that, please. Sorry guys, just making sure we get ourselves all set up. Click on the video. Okay, and then we should be able to see the chat on the right hand side. So if you scroll to the right, might have to widen the window a little bit. Okay, no worries. Well, if you guys can hear me, please do give me a message in the chat box, just so I can confirm that you guys can hear me okay. Okay, perfect. Click on the video again, mate. Okay, cool. Now scroll to the right or widen the window if you need to. Okay. Cool. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Sorry, guys. Bear with me 1 second. Keep going, keep going. Come on, Kev, so I can see all the message. All the way. Keep going. Okay, cool. Right. Okay, I'll tell you what. Sorry, guys, just bear with me 1 second. Kev, if you do a half screen and you do the half screen on YouTube as well, I'll open up the messages within here. Sorry, guys, I have a typical model that I like to follow. We're trying a couple of new things today. So apologies that it's not quite working as well as we like. Just leave the notes hidden. Do the half screen. So on the green. Sorry, guys. There we go. That's it. So, okay, yes. So what your best investment area is going to be. Then it's also going to be your capital requirements. Okay, so what are the capital requirements that you need to be looking at? Right, okay, now if you can scroll across to the side there. Can get you on YouTube, not on Facebook. So you should be on Facebook as well, John. Thanks for dropping a message. Yeah, if you slide that across, Kev. Okay, keep going, keep going, keep going. Just so I can read the messages from everybody. Okay. Sorry, guys. Technology is a wonderful thing. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Right, guys, there we go, there we go. We are all officially set up. So my apologies. Evening, everybody. Thanks for your lovely messages of welcome. Super cool to see you all. Obviously, a lot of very familiar names there, which is very cool. So, hi, Isaac, Kashaloon, Takena, Kathy, Colin, and obviously the rest of you guys. Thank you very much for joining in. And also John over there on Facebook, on YouTube. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you guys have a really good session. It should be really fun. So yes, so as I was saying, so we're also going to look at the capital requirements. So how much funding are you going to need for a typical investment property or a typical flip, depending on where you are in the country, whether it's in the north or whether it's in the Midlands or whether it's in the south. Then we're also going to be looking at how you add value to these properties. Okay, how can you add value to make sure that the property has got the best value and therefore enables you to be able to sell it for a profit? After that, how can you get a better sale price? Now, this is kind of juicy. So some of the little tips and tricks that we've learned over the years on how you can get a better sale price for your investment property or your flip, and also how you can get a quicker sale. So how you can get things sold and agreed quicker and moving on a little bit quicker, which is very cool. Then also, how long should it take? So how long is the typical length of actually doing this? And finally, but not least, is just to show you a little bit of an example deal, which we'll do over on the iPad, which you'll be able to see directly behind me, which should be pretty cool. But if you guys have any questions, please do post them on the Facebook group or on YouTube, depending where you're at. Kev, can you just scroll down? I get the feeling it's going to be... Okay, cool. Excellent. Very cool. Hey, Gavin. Awesome to have you on, buddy. Thank you very much for joining. Very, very cool. Yes. So let's first of all kick off with what is a flip. Okay. Let's start with the basics and the fundamentals. For those of you that are new and are not 100% sure on a whole bunch of property stuff, there is some jargon within the industry, so I'm going to try and break it back and use as little jargon as possible. But essentially, a property flip. Okay. The term is a flip is where you buy a house and then flip it back onto the market. Okay. So you buy it, add value in one of many, many ways, which we'll go through in a little while, and then you flip it back on the market and resell it for a profit. Okay, this is called a flip. Now, there's a lot of pros and cons when it comes to flipping in properties. So some of the benefits are releases lumps of cash, gives you nice little lumps of money that you can go and reinvest in other projects. It's also a much easier strategy to partner with people because if you consider a buy and hold, so something like a buy to let or something called a HMO, which is shared housing, this is a shared deal, and when you are partners with somebody on that deal, you're partners until that deal is sold or until you create some other way in which you divide. Whereas a flip, as soon as you sell it, that's it, it's done, partnership over. So it's a really good way, a really useful way to be able to test some relationships. Now, some of the negatives about it is it is significantly higher in terms of risk, and it is by far a higher risk. And what I mean by that is if you don't get the right buyer walk through the door, or if you have issues in the industry or the marketplace or the economy, then those can cause detrimental issues because typically you'll be buying flips on something called bridging finance, which is higher interest lending. Okay, and I promise you don't want to be sitting on high interest lending for months and months and months. It's not a nice place to be, and it tends to get very expensive and eats into all of your profit. Okay, so that is what a flip is, guys. Now, second thing is the different ways in which you can buy them. Hey, Daniela, awesome for you to join. Thank you very much for tuning in. Now, for those of you that are a little bit curious, I'm keen to get some feedback. How do you think you can buy properties? So name some of the methods in which you can use to buy investment properties. Okay, give me some of the methods. And obviously, I have to wait a second for Facebook and YouTube to catch up. Okay, but what are some of the methods that you can use to buy investment properties? Okay, so first and foremost, you can buy it for cash. Okay, nice and simple. You can buy an investment property on cash. Okay, everyone knows this one. Now, second one, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting, is that you can also buy it on something called bridging finance. Now, bridging finance, if you think of a payday loan, okay, a payday loan, bridging finance is essentially a payday loan. You're paying a high interest so that you can buy the property with much fewer questions asked, and they're okay to be used as something called short-term lenders. Okay, auction, exactly, Colin. Yes, so you can also buy properties or flips through auction, so that is a place where you can go and buy it. Obviously not a method, but certainly a place you can go and buy them. Okay, and so you've got buying for cash, then you've also got buying for bridging finance, okay, high interest lending. Third one, which is a way that I do not recommend, and I recommend you do not do, but a lot of people teach us and a lot of people do this, but it's not okay, is something called mortgages. Okay, now I know you guys will have heard of mortgages. Buying on a mortgage and then flipping a house, if you do it once, maybe if you do it twice, you'll get away with it. But mortgage lenders do not like to be used as short-term lending. So if you end up using them as short-term lending and end up not just buying it on a mortgage but then selling it within, say, 12 months, and you get caught doing this repetitively, they will get very upset, and there's a very good chance that they'll blacklist you from their lending. Okay. Now, the challenge is you don't know who they're connected to, you don't know what other effects this might have in your property career. And there's only so many lenders out there. So I urge you, do not do that. Okay, if you're going to do it, you can either do it with cash. Now, the benefit is it doesn't have to be your cash. Okay, if you have cash to do it, sure, it's an option. Okay, vice versa, if you have an investor who's willing to put up the cash in turn for a fixed return, okay, so somebody you know who's got extra cash in the bank, they give you the money for the project, for everything, and they get a fixed return, a percentage return on their investment. Hey, Clive, awesome. Thank you very much for joining in, man. Awesome to have you in. But yeah, so they get a fixed return. So they might get 10% on their money or 6% on their money. And that's what they get. They get their fixed return. Or the third method is something called a joint venture partner. Okay, now for those of you that aren't aware, a joint venture partner is essentially a business partner. Typically, one will bring one thing and the other brings something else. So somebody will typically bring money and somebody else will bring the effort and the deal and the time and the knowledge and the input. Okay, and I actually believe that the latter is much more valuable than a bit of money. Money on its own is not, it's not amazing. whereas a deal on its own can be turned into money. Okay, so the deal will always be more valuable than the money. However, you need both to be able to make it happen. So that's where the joint venture comes in, and typically I always suggest a 50-50 split, so nobody feels like they're getting the short straw or they're getting the short end of the deal. That is my suggestion. That is how I like to operate. Of course, you can do this however you'd like to do. Okay, so those are your typical buying methods. So you can typically buy in some semblance of cash, or you can typically buy in some semblance of bridging. Now, the benefit of bridging is it doesn't have to be your money for the deposit, and it doesn't have to be your money for the refurbishment. There is a whole heap of places in which you can get funding for this. Now, some lenders will do 100% lending, not so much at the minute. Or development finance as well. Again, not so much at the minute, depending on the projects you're looking at, just because of obviously Corona and everything as to where we're at. Okay, but then you've also got places like your investors or like your joint venture partners, where they put in all the money for the deal and you still get bridging finance. Now, for me, they shouldn't get 50% in terms of doing that, because then what you've done is you've taken all of the profit and pretty much half of it goes to the bridging company, and then half of what's left goes towards the joint venture partner. As far as I'm concerned, you've just taken a quarter profit. It just doesn't compute for me. So my suggestion would be that you would want to take a higher stake if you do it that way. But it's completely down to you. I mean, it's your choice. But yeah, so that's how you can typically essentially buy or purchase a flip property. But the important thing is how you find it. Okay, now how you find a flip property. Because it's one thing being able to do them, it's another thing being able to find them. And if you can't find them, you can't do them. Okay, it's a chicken and egg situation. Okay, so next thing is you need to understand the difference between a flipping and a buying area. Now this is important. Okay, and this is part of how we've put together our systems, how we've put together our teams, how we've actually modeled out the entire investment process. So I'm just going to use my iPad for some of this. If it dies, I am sorry. I will try and keep it alive. It's only at 7% battery, as you guys will probably see there. Okay, but if you consider a seesaw. Okay, a seesaw. Oh, pen's dead. Oh, it's typical, isn't it? Okay, so if you consider a... yep, pen's dead. So if you consider a seesaw, okay, and you consider on one side of the seesaw, you have so you have buy-to-lets, and on the other side of the seesaw you have flipping. Now, typically, what you'll find if you consider supply and demand, so the whole thing's all based on supply and demand, and in areas of supply and demand, if you have a high supply but not a very high demand, of course the value will be lower. And vice versa, if you have a low supply and a high demand, the value will be higher. Okay, so if the demand is higher than supply, the value will go up. If the demand is higher or lower than supply, the value will either stay the same or go down. Okay, this is simple business logic. Now, in exactly the same way, if you have an investment area where people tend to be, hey, Andy and Maureen, awesome to have you guys on. If you're investing in an area where you find that a lot of people can afford to rent the houses, but they can't afford to buy. Okay, that then tells you typically in this type of area that the values of the properties would go up very slowly, but the rents of the areas will go up pretty quickly. Okay, so that is what we call a high rental demand, a low sale demand area. Now, on the inverse side is if you have areas where there's a lot of people who'd like to buy and there's not enough properties there, but you've got a lot of people who'd like to buy and can afford to buy there, then you have a very high demand for purchase, okay, which means that the values will go up. Now, what you tend to find is in high purchase areas, people don't tend to rent as much because, you know, either they can afford to be in the area or not. So what you tend to find is the rents don't go up as fast as the values of the properties. So you have this sort of seesaw effect where either it is more a flipping area, so where you can buy and sell houses for a good price, or it is more a rental area where the property values are low but the rents are high in comparison. And it's a seesaw. Now you get the areas that are kind of in the middle, which is kind of where I like to hang around, because if things don't work out for whatever reason, you always have an alternative option or an alternative exit, okay, which is really, really useful. Now, in terms of different areas that you can actually find and different areas that you can look at for flipping and for buy-to-lets, obviously the areas where the value's low compared to the rent, okay, and this is how we calculate it out. Now, some people do it in terms of yields. For anybody who doesn't know what yield is, feel free to Google it. But yield is basically the value of the property and then the percentage of the rent, gross rent every year, and what percentage that is of the value of the property. That is then termed the yield. Okay, that's called the yield. If the yield tends to be high, now just so we're clear, I don't tend to like working in yield. I like to work on return on investment and cash flow. But for the interest of a very simple exercise, if you look at yield, if the yield is high, then you tend to find that that is a very high rental area and not a very good sale area. So that's not going to be a good area for you to be flipping. Whereas if you find an area where there's a very low yield, okay, a very low yield, so as if you look in London like a 2-3% yield, then what that tells you is this is a great area to be selling properties, but not the best area to be renting in comparison to that. Now, unfortunately, this is two ends of the extreme, right? This is two ends of the extreme. You've got all the way up in Stockton-on-Tees over in Middlesbrough, where you can buy a house for £20,000. That'll only be worth £30,000, but still rents for £400 a month. So that's a really, really good yield. Or the inverse of that is you've got London, where you have really high values, and the rents, although they're good, in comparison are very low. So the problem with these areas is neither of these, believe it or not, are actually good for flipping. And it's not because they won't sell, because of course in London you know the deals will sell. The biggest problem you've got in London is actually being able to get enough stock available to buy for the right price with the ability to do work. So what I tend to like to do is, instead of looking at either end of the extreme, is I tend to look somewhere in the middle, where you know values are pretty high in comparison to rents, but they're not massively high in comparison to rents. Okay, so you're talking yields of 4-5%, like somewhere around there. For me, this is where you go, okay, well, this could potentially be a good area to flip. Whereas, if you're going for either end of the spectrum, of course, it comes with its own challenges. So that's how I tend to look at the areas that I like to look to flip, because the demand for properties isn't so high that you're going to be priced out of the marketplace, and it's also not so low that you wouldn't be able to sell it. I hope this makes sense. If this makes sense, just give me a like in the chat. Just give me a like on YouTube, or give me a heart, or whatever it is, on YouTube or Facebook, if this makes sense to you, because it's an important definition. I want to make sure that this makes sense. Or just give me a 1 in the chat box if this makes sense. Okay, so that is your selection of area as to how it works. Now, yield is very simple to work out. There is nothing stopping you going and testing 50 properties. Okay, and my suggestion, if you're going to be looking further north, is keep the property prices under 250. If you're going further and further south, obviously those property prices keep going up. Okay, awesome, good. I'm glad you guys understand, so very good. Okay, so you want to make sure that you keep the prices from being the top of the market. You're not trying to flip footballer houses. Okay, the problem is with those is if anything happens in the market, okay, there's only a few people that are buying. You're not looking at the whole of market. It isn't a big pool that you're fishing in. You want a big pond that you're fishing in. You want a lot of potential buyers. Okay. Right, so next is capital requirement, which ties into exactly what I'm saying, which is where you're looking. So obviously, anywhere up the north, you want to keep it less than 250, even around Manchester. This is my belief. Obviously, you may have different beliefs and different experience, and that's down to you, and come further and further south. Now, please understand, the more it goes up in value, okay, and that tells you typically the higher the demand is, and then that tells you that it's going to be harder and harder to buy a house for a discount. So in terms of how you add value, we'll have to swing from just the standard refurbishment to doing things a little bit more excessive, such as loft conversions, extensions, basement conversions, splitting titles. So it starts to become a much bigger game to be able to increase the value, as opposed to what you typically do in the north, which is just tart the place up, make it look nice and pretty, give it a good finish, and then list it to sell. So in terms of capital requirements, now it's a really interesting question, because there's a huge mixed bag. Now, what we tend to find for the sort of flip projects that our mentorship students buy, which is typically in the north of England, so you're talking Manchester and north, for anybody who's a little bit unsure, and we look for houses that are no more than 150,000, primarily just because in terms of the areas, that means that you're sort of in that little sweet spot of yield or flipping area. So normally what we tend to find is it's about 35 to 40,000, somewhere around that mark, for a typical amount of money to go in for that flip project, buying using bridging. Now, we always use bridging when it comes to flips, unless we can cash the whole thing using investor funds. Now, I wouldn't cash the whole thing myself, because I'd rather leverage that money over further deals. Feel free to take a look at one of our previous videos. We go through leverage in depth. Really interesting video, by the way. Really interesting video. I think it's week 4 or 5, sometime around then. Okay. So we tend to find for our mentorship students, now we've got 150 mentorship students, of which 77 are still within their terms, so we're still working with those now, that the vast majority of those doing flips will do flips in the north of England, and it normally takes somewhere between 35 and 40,000 using bridging. Okay, so that's their deposit and refurbishment and stamp duty and legal fees and all of that good stuff, and the rest is covered by bridging. Okay, and refurbishment, of course. So that's your typical cash requirements in the north. Now, the further south you come, you start knocking into the hundreds of thousands, especially when you start going on the outskirts of London. Now, central London is crazy. You guys will all know this. But when you start going on the outskirts of London, and I mean sort of around the M25, but on the inside, not on the outside. Okay, on the outside, you tend to go into more rural areas where it is not built up enough to be able to know that you're going to get enough demand. Another thing to add when it comes to selecting your area is make sure you're picking areas where there's enough population. You don't want to go have a countryside house in the middle of nowhere that nobody wants to live in, and you're waiting for one buyer who actually just wants to live in the country. So you want to make sure you create the project within an area where there's a lot of demand. Okay. The capital requirements as you come further and further south and go all around there, you're talking, you're going up to, $250,000, maybe anything even up to $500,000, depending on the size of projects you're doing. But primarily, you're looking at between 100,000 and 250,000 for that sort of area. And it's primarily because instead of just doing a standard refurbishment, you have to be doing something a little bit more explorative. So things like putting on extensions, exactly as I said earlier, loft conversions, basement conversions, splitting into apartments, splitting titles. There's a whole bunch of ways in which you can add value. And unfortunately, those are the only ways that really work in and around the London area. The buy a house that's run down and refurbish it and sell it is a really tough model to implement in London just because of the discounts you're able to get, which tend to be very, very small. Okay, so that's sort of your capital requirements in terms of where you're looking there. Now, in terms of adding value, obviously we've gone through the ways already, but adding value, you're either just doing a refurbishment and just tidying it up, making it look really nice and pretty, or vice versa, you're going to be looking at doing things like extensions, etc., etc., exactly as we've gone through. Now, that is how you're going to add value. Now, another one that is a useful way in which you can add value is something called a planning gain. Okay, a planning gain, where you take on a property and you get planning, okay, which would inherently be fairly challenging to get depending on the project, and that planning then gives you the ability to, I don't know, let's say build another house on the side. Okay, now that is a very useful planning because you know that property when built might be worth $500,000, it's going to cost $150,000 to build, but you've now just increased the value of that entire plot because you've just got the planning through so somebody can actually implement that project. So you might make another 50 or 100,000 or whatever as an extra little sort of benefit or planning gain, because again, you've increased the value of the property through one of many methods. Okay, next is how can you get a better sale price? Now this one I really like, and it's a very simple trick, and I love simple, so for us everything within the program is all about being very simple, very easy, and the most challenging thing is just getting out your comfort zone, right? Now the thing that I love about what we're about to discuss, we've discussed it in a previous video anyway, but I think it's brilliant. Which is something when it comes to flipping properties that is as simple as doing something called dressing. So you dress the property. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. Whenever you're looking at properties online, and then you see, it's got this really nice like bed and sofa and all of this furniture. It all looks pristine, and you're going, well, you can tell nobody lives there. It looks way too neat and tidy. Okay, this is called property dressing, where you make the property look amazing. You put in furniture. You hang drapes for the windows, you put a throw over the bed, you put some lovely pillows, lampshades, bedside tables, some basic furniture, and you take photos and move the furniture around the house, flip over the throw or change the pillows so you have two-sided colored pillows. So there's loads of little tricks that you can do, put in crockery and all that sort of stuff in the kitchen, and just take photos and photograph throughout. Now this is also a great time to get your walkthrough videos. If you have enough furniture to be able to go through, you can potentially look to get walkthrough videos and then splice the videos together. So you walk into a room, and then when you turn around, you wait till you're in the doorway, and then pause it, go move the stuff to the other room, continue from the doorway, go into the other room, and essentially do things that way. Now, something as simple as a walkthrough or a virtual tour, so they're calling them virtual tours now. They've been around for years, but now all of a sudden it's the hot thing because of the whole Corona thing. A virtual tour in photography that makes the property wow. Understand that about 80% of the property selling is getting people through the door. The last 20% is them walking around going, yeah, actually this works for me. 80% is getting them through the door. So if you can get nice photos and a nice video walkthrough and make it appealing, okay, and then also go with estate agents that have, depending on what type of property it is, if it's a property up in the north and it's an okay little house, it'll just flip okay, stick it in a normal, with a normal estate agent. But as soon as you're starting to go into sort of a slightly raised sort of quality of property within an area, you want to start going for the more luxurious appearing estate agents, okay? Start speaking to people around. You know, when you think of the, you know, the posh estate agents, who do you think of? That sort of stuff. Now that is hugely valuable. That is a hugely valuable way of, because they will have a certain clientele that has an expectations of having a good property to live in or to move into. So that's a really cool way in which you can essentially maximize your sale price, because it has a much nicer feel and it will make it feel a lot easier. Okay, now the next thing is in terms of how you speed up your sale. Now I like this. This is another little cool trick. Actually taught to me by one of my property mentors from many years back, a chap called Danny Inman. I know many of you guys will know him. Wonderful man. I do love him. He's definitely helped us along on our journey. And Danny made the recommendation when we had a property we needed to sell. He says when you're about halfway through the refurbishment or within the first couple of weeks, you want to create flyers, okay, with what you're expecting to sell the house for, a nice photo, handwritten, okay, handwritten because you want it to feel a little bit personal. And then at the bottom have something like choose your own kitchen or choose your own carpets or something like that, and then hand that out to the local neighborhood. Okay, so 2 or 3 streets. Okay, hand that out because people will have family that, like a lot of people, particularly in the north of England, a lot of people have family that live close to them. So if they see that a house is for sale and they know their son or their cousin or their nephew or someone they know looking for a house, they're like, hey, look, there's this brilliant little house. They're busy refurbishing it at the minute. Okay, and as part of them refurbishing it, there's also the opportunity to pick your own kitchen. You know, what worktops do you want? And you essentially get them booked in that way. And as soon as they've picked their own kitchen and put the money in, you know they're buying that house. They're not walking away at this point. You know they're buying that house. Okay, so it's a great way to be able to get the sale agreed long before the refurbishment is even finished. So really cool little trick there, which I thought was amazing the first time I learnt it, and we utilized it on one of our projects, which is really cool. Next, and now how long should this typically take, which is a very useful question. So a typical flip project will take somewhere in the region of about 2 to 3 months to buy it. So from point of getting your sale agreed, 2 to 3 months to buy it as standard, okay? So normally it's 8 to 12 weeks. This is fairly normal because you have to wait for legals and all of that fun stuff. Now, if you're buying cash, you can force that to happen a lot quicker, but very important word of warning, okay, is if you do not make sure all of the searches are done, if you're indemnifying against some of those searches and some of them aren't done, the new buyer, okay, if they find a problem with the searches, they might not be happy indemnifying and therefore they might not be happy buying. So my suggestion is if you're flipping, always make sure you go through all of your searches, okay, and make sure everything is correct, because you do not, the trick is not to make your buyer want to buy the house, is to give them no reason to not buy. Okay, that's the art of what you do with flipping, is give them no reason to not buy the project. Okay, so get all your searches done, and that typically takes 8 to 12 weeks, as I was saying. Now the refurbishment, depending on the project that you're undertaking. Now if it's a basic clean up and tidy up, anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks is pretty standard. Okay, 1 to 2 months is pretty standard. A basic tidy up, you know, maybe a rewire, maybe new heating system, you know, just basically make it look really nice and fresh, skim it, new carpets, new kitchen, new bathroom. Okay, 4 to 8 weeks is pretty standard. If you are doing something a little bit more explorative, understand that planning can take several months to be able to get through. Building control can take a while to get sorted as well. Okay, so the more complex of a project you're doing, the more time you need to allow. And these typical types of projects where you're doing loft conversions or you're doing extensions, okay, proper extensions, not the little 3 by 3 meter squared, which is within a third of the footprint of the house. If you're doing a proper extension, especially a 2-story extension, you want to be giving yourself somewhere around 6 to 9 months. Okay, 6 to 9 months to get everything done, including planning, including architecture, including everything else. Okay, just to allow yourself enough time. Now, realistically, you should be having it done between 3 to 6 months, but allow 6 to 9 months. Okay, it's prudent. And then in terms of sale time, again, depending on where you are, typically you're going to have a sale time of anywhere between 1 month, okay, which can happen within the refurbishment process, between 1 month in the more higher demand areas, anything up to maybe even 6 months, okay, when you start to go further and further north into the lower demand areas. Okay, so for a basic turnover project, we normally allow about 10 months from point of purchase through to point of sale and completion as a standard run rate for a normal property in the north. Now in the south, depending on the scale of the project, of course, that can vary, and you just need to account for it. Make sure you account. If you do not account for it and you've only got 6 months worth of bridging finance, and at the end of 6 months you have to pay an extension fee for another 6 months, that is painful. Okay, I'm telling you now, that is painful. So you've got to make sure that you actually account the right amount of time. Minimum bridging term on a flip would be 12 months. If you can get longer, because they don't charge you extra for going into a longer term. They only charge you extra if you come to the end of your term, although they might charge you a higher interest for a longer term. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now I wanted to go through a quick example deal with you guys, and it's just essentially a typical type of deal that we would have done. So I'm trying to think of, so we've got one property called Queen's Drive. Okay, I'm going to try and remember the numbers off the top of my head. We actually have it as part of our presentation. But I'm pretty sure we had a purchase price of 96k. So apologies if the numbers are slightly out. If you've been to one of our presentations, you'll know the numbers because you would have seen the deal. It's one of many deals that we show. Purchase price of 96k. Refurb, I believe, was about 25k because we needed to do the windows throughout the entire property, and it had a lot of windows, like a lot of windows. Okay, and then we ended up, we got other costs, legal, stamp duty, etc., of somewhere probably around, I don't know, 8k, something like that. Now we actually got this sold pretty quickly, and we actually managed to get this project sold, okay, for 168k. Okay, now this is over in a place called Windle over St Helens, WA10. I think the postcode is WA10 6HE, if I remember correctly, 11 Queen's Drive. And the company that we used to run was Warrington Investing, so you'll see it there. Okay, now if you do your math on this, I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around here. If I remember correctly, I think we did about 28,000 in flip profit, if I'm correct. So that's why I say these figures might be slightly out, but I'll go through it anyway. But just so you can see a typical example of a deal that we would typically do. So you've got 96 plus 25, so what's that? That's 121, 129. Minus 129, so that's 39. Okay, so obviously a little bit out, but if I remember correctly, I think we made about, give or take, about 28k on this project. This is a typical sort of flip that we would be doing. Now, understand that depending on where you're investing, if there's a higher demand within that particular area, it's going to be harder to be able to find the projects at the right price to be able to make this work and make this make sense. Okay, but I thought it'd be useful just to go through one of these. Now, obviously we've covered quite a lot of ground in a very short space of time. I just want to check in. If you've had some value, or if you thought that was good, please just give me a 2 in the chat box, or give me a like, or give me a share, and just get this out to some of your friends, because I'm keen to sort of hear what you guys are thinking. And please do ask any questions. So this is the perfect time to ask some questions as well. So yeah, so make sure you get your 2 out in the chat box. Also get your like and your share, just so I know that you guys are actually getting some value. You thought that was cool, and you essentially are learning stuff, which is brilliant. Okay, awesome, cool. Right, okay, so have you guys got any questions? So I'm keen to sort of check if you guys have any questions. Although it does seem, Kev, can you remove or stop it from being on full screen, because I can't see all the way to the bottom there. Sorry, Kev is my good friend and also the man who runs the AV. Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing the stream there, Clive. Really, really appreciate it, buddy. Very cool. Thank you. That's right. Swipe across. Hang on. Swipe across. And then stop that from being maxed. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, brilliant. Excellent. Right. So have you guys got any questions? If you have no question, just give me a no in the chat box if you do not have a question for me, if you have nothing you'd like to ask. If you do have a question, please pop it in the chat box. I will endeavor to make sure all of your questions get answered. And I would hate to end the stream whilst you're still typing. So I look forward to seeing your questions popping through. Right, okay, so we've got a couple of questions that I've kicked in. So firstly, from Imogen, because this is a bit of a high risk, do you need to make sure that it will also work as a buy-to-let in case it doesn't sell? Really, really, really good question there, Imogen. So this is why I like to have those areas that are somewhere in the middle instead of primarily looking in areas that are very high demand for sale. Because if for whatever reason, and this is very important, if for whatever reason you cannot sell the property, you're going to find yourself in a position where you have a property that will not give you a rental, a positive rental income after you take into account all your expenses, so a positive cash flow. And if that is the case, then you're basically stuck with a property that's going to cost you money. Okay, so it is very important to try and make sure that your property, as a worst case scenario, if you had to refinance it, would still give you a positive income month on month based on your 3 or 4% interest rate. Now, please understand that typically we work on a 5% interest rate with a £100 a month cash flow, and based on an interest-only mortgage. You guys will see this, and if you attend one of our events, we go through this whole thing, and this is stress testing. But as a bare minimum, you want to be making sure you're earning money at a 3 or 4% interest rate at this. Now, please understand that that is not a good buy-to-let, and if the market moves drastically, it's not a great property to be owning, which is why I say you want to make sure that you can cash flow reasonably. Okay, really good question there, Imogen. Thank you very much for asking it. Okay, so did you say you can get bridging finance to cover all parts of the transaction? So yes, so there are some bridging finances that do it. Secure the Bridge is one of them, although I don't know if they still do it. That's how I did my first project. But they didn't cover the refurbishment cost. They only covered 100% of the purchase. Please understand, the cost for this is high. Okay, it was eye-watering, but it made the project work. I ended up paying for the refurbishment on a credit card. Okay, I paid for the refurbishment on a credit card. Well, actually, numerous credit cards, paying for materials, paying for labor, drawing cash, etc. So there is ways in which you can do it with none of your own cash, but please understand it is very expensive and very often destroys the deal. So the deal that looked like it would give you, I don't know, a 20% return on your money ends up only giving you 5% because the cost of finance costs you so much. But yes, it is certainly possible. That's kind of really, really good question, mate. Kev, can you scroll down on YouTube just in case there's questions on there as well? So let you scroll? No? Okay, no worries. Okay, so question from Clive. Is it any more difficult finding flips after coronavirus? So, I mean, for me, this is a really interesting question. A really, really interesting question. So, if in the coronavirus, there's a lot of opportunities to buy some really good deals. The biggest challenge that you're facing, and I urge you guys to do this, try and book some viewings. Okay, and you'll very quickly notice it is next to impossible to get a viewing within the next 2 weeks, which tells you something about the demand in the market. Okay, there's a lot of people with money sitting aside, with pent-up frustration and the need to buy a property that are ready to rock and roll, and they're all out there viewing houses, which means the entire market is being saturated with people buying. Now that tells you something in terms of the likelihood of you being able to buy a deal at below market value or significantly below market value. And obviously it is going to be certainly inhibited for a period of time while we get our snapback and almost our normalization back in the industry. So my answer is for a while, yes. But I think at some point in the near future that will sort of equalize itself back out again, and you should be able to get moving again with that, Clive. Really good question. By the way, guys, if I ask a question, if it answers your question, you're happy, please just give me a smiley face or a happy or a like or something, just so I know that you guys are okay with the answer, because if you're not, I want to make sure I continue to answer to make sure you get the best response that you want. Okay, now a question from Kathy. How much do you need to deposit for bridging finance, or will they fund the whole project? So some bridging companies will fund a little bit more, so they will give you a little bit more, and they might go up to 80%, 85%, 90% of the value of the purchase. Okay, let me be clear of the value of the purchase. Typically, however, they're somewhere between 70% and 75%. Awesome, Imogen, thank you. But they give you normally between 70% and 75%, particularly in today's current market with everything going on. They're around the 70% mark for a normal bridging finance. Now, there's a lot of issues with regards to brokers and bridging because some of the lenders have essentially pulled the plug, Together being one of the main ones. They've said they're not lending via any brokers, barring 15 across the entire country. So a lot of mortgage brokers have had the plug pulled. So they're now struggling to get decent rate lending. However, you can still go direct it together. So we've got a chap called Scott who's on our power team that our mentorship students have access to, and he still gets 0.85% interest, 70% loan to value, 2% in, 0% out. He's been brilliant, and I absolutely love Scott. So Scott, if you're tuning in, thank you very much. It's very cool. So yes, so typically they won't fund the entire project. They'll normally fund a percentage of the purchase. Now, the interesting thing to note is you have two different ways in which bridging finance companies lend you money. Okay, so they've either got, payment, so interest paid up front. So we call this rolled up. Okay, so rolled up, where essentially they might go, okay, well, I'm going to lend you 75%, but, and that 75%, let's say, equates to 80,000, but your interest over the 12 months of this term is 8,000, so I'm only going to lend you 72,000 because it's 80,000 minus the interest because I'm going to take the interest up front. Really cheeky. I really, really, really don't like this, and it really upsets me with bridging lenders because it basically you haven't received that money, but you're paying interest on money you haven't received. How does that work from a legal standpoint? That just doesn't feel legal to me. But it is what it is. They make their own rules. The second way is where you get to pay that interest every single month of the term. Now, understand if you pay off your bridging finance before the end of your term, so let's say it's a 12-month term, you pay it at 10 months, you get those 2 months you don't have to pay the interest for. And if you pay 12 months up front, you get the 2 months interest back. Okay, so in terms of that, it's okay, and it does help people with some planning, but I don't like it. It just feels a little icky. But, you know, it's not my industry, and for now, at least, I don't own a bridging company. Perhaps in the future, who knows, we'll see. And then another question there by Carmelo, just being lazy, do you have a flip deal sheet? Yes, so we actually have a sheet that goes through all the numbers on a flip deal. So Carmelo's one of our mentorship students. Yeah, completely Colin. So Carmelo's one of our mentorship students, and yes, we have what we call a deal analyzer for flips, and we also have the deal finder, which is the technology that helps you find deals. That can also help you find flips as well. Really good question. Also, in terms of our board or our site for the mentorship students to pick up all the source deals from the other mentees, we do get flips come on there occasionally. Not very often in the current climate, just because of how things are. But when things slow down again, you'll start to get a lot more flips coming through, which is cool. But yeah, exactly as you say, Colin, unregulated lenders. Now, it's really funny. So I learned a little bit about regulations around lending. And I thought that regulated and unregulated lenders meant that they had all these hoops to jump through. The only difference is one's lending to private individuals and one's lending to a company. Go figure. That is literally the difference. Because one has a little bit more regulation on what they have to follow because of I think it's the consumer, whatever it is. And then you've got the other one, which is to a limited company, so they don't have that. I'm struggling to see what it's called, the Consumer Act or something, Consumer Rights Act or something. But yes, so really good question there. So for those of you on YouTube, I'm really struggling to be able to see if you guys have got any questions. Unfortunately, YouTube's being a little bit of a pain. It won't let us scroll down. So Kev, I don't know if you can, I don't know, pull the page up or something, and just take a look that way. Oh. Okay, there you go, and just pull it down at the bottom as well. There we go. Okay, yes, we have got other comments down there, and it's not letting us get to them. There we go. Okay, Consumer Credit Act, lovely. Thank you, Tony. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. The Consumer Credit Act, which I love. Okay. Really funny, it's not letting Kevin move back up now. So, okay, perfect. Yeah, it's not going to do it for you, mate. Don't worry. It is what it is. Okay, brilliant. So, if you've got any other questions, okay, so perfect. So, what is the equation to work out yield? Really, really good question there, John. Absolutely brilliant question. So, I'll give you that as a response because I think it's a good question. So, hopefully, you guys can still see sort of behind me. Trying to think. Okay, so that will be on that side. So the yield is basically so annual gross rent. Okay, so this is the calculation for what we call gross yield. Okay, gross yield. So you have your annual gross rent, and then that is divided by your property value is the term. Okay, so property value. Now, this can also be on your purchase price, depending on how you do it, but it's on the property value. Now, if we have an example and we just say the annual gross rent for this one is 6,000 per year, so it's £500 a month. Okay, and the property value is 100K. Okay, I'm sure you guys will very quickly be able to realize or work out. Oh, brilliant. You guys will be able to work out that that would then equate to a 6% gross yield. Okay, so 6% gross yield. Okay, and I'll slide that up as well so it's a little bit easier for you guys to see. So that's the calculation. Really good question there, Maureen. Thank you very much for asking. Kev, can you get back down on there, or Andy and Maureen? Sorry, my apologies. Whichever of you guys is on. It's very cool. Thank you. I would suggest click all the way on the bottom one and see what happens. Okay, cool. Excellent. Bridging loans are hard to get at the minute. So I wouldn't say bridging loans are hard to get at the moment. You just got to know how to do it. Reach out to me. I can connect you with the relevant person to be able to get good bridging loans. So just reach out to me, guys, and then I'll be able to set that up for you at really, really, really good rates. Kev, can you scroll all the way down on Facebook? Okay, so would you buy... sorry, Kev, click on Facebook because I can't read the whole question. Okay, so would you buy auction properties for flipping? Possibly. So I'm not a big fan of auction properties, and I'll explain very quickly. So if you're buying in an auction, before you buy a property from auction, okay, what you tend to have to do is you tend to have to speak to your solicitor and get them to review the legal pack. Okay, because you don't buy a house without reviewing the legal pack, because you can have all sorts of nasty things hiding in there. You might have agreements that mean that you have no ability to do anything or finance the property, or somebody could take it away from you, something called an option agreement. There's loads of things that could be hidden in the legal pack. Okay, now the problem is if you try and review it yourself and this is not your world, please understand that they do something. So solicitors do this thing called a shit sandwich. Okay, and I learned this from a solicitor friend of mine. He says, very simply, if you take a look at because by law they have to release all the relevant information. Okay, so instead of them just releasing that one bit that they know is the thing that you're really looking for, they will release and inundate you with so much paperwork, and then they will sandwich that one piece of crap right in the middle, the one thing that can completely destroy the whole case. They will sandwich that in the middle and go, there we go, in the hope that you will overlook it, in the hope that solicitors overlook it. That's why solicitors are so diligent, because they know that that's exactly how they all work. Okay, so when it comes to the legal pack, obviously you want to get your solicitor to do it, and that comes at a cost. Now you're going to be doing that, and then you're going to go to the property, then you're going to get your builder to go and check it out, then you're going to get your structural surveyor to check it out, and all of these things cost money. And you still don't have the deal agreed yet. And then you turn up an auction and somebody buys it for an outlandish price, and you've just lost that money. There's no way you're going to get that money back. It's lost. It's gone. Bye-bye. See you later. Whereas if you buy it through the way in which we buy it, which is typically on the market, because the estate agents do all the hard work of pulling all the properties together. I don't know why people do direct to vendor. Just it's illogical to me, but you know, some people do it and they get great success, and that's cool. It's very skill set based. Okay, so the estate agents do all the hard work of bringing all that information together, and then until you get your offer accepted, you don't pay money. So for me, I'm sitting there going, well, why would you pay money that you don't need to pay for deals that you don't yet have agreed? It's illogical. Now, I'm not saying it's the wrong way, but it just doesn't make sense to me. And there's some people who do this to great effect. And sure, there's a million ways in which you can invest in property, and my way is not necessarily the best, but if I'm completely honest, I'm yet to find one that's better. Okay, one that is less, easier or simpler or less skill set based. I can't find any, which is why we have such great success. I mean, our mentorship students have executed on about 140 deals within the last 22 months. 140 deals in the last 22 months. That's around 11 point something million pounds worth of property in the last 22 months, just through our mentorship program. So for me, I'm sitting there going, well, why would I do things the difficult way when we've got a very easy system that does everything the simple way? And that's what our mentorship students get to learn. Okay, cool. Right, I mean, have you guys got any other questions? If you've got any other questions, please give me a Q in the chat box and follow up with a question, because I don't want to cut you off while you're busy typing. It's horrible when that happens. If you don't have a question, please do me a favor, just give me a no in the chat box if you don't have a question and you're on, just so I know that I don't have to sit here and sort of wait for other people to try and type. So just give me a no in the chat box if you do not have a question. And if you've enjoyed the stream, okay, if you've enjoyed the stream and you haven't already, please give me a like, please give me a share on YouTube or Facebook, depending on where you're at. You know, or just give me a big smiley face in the chat box, just so I know you guys have enjoyed the share and you've had a lot of value and you've enjoyed it. No questions. Awesome. Thank you, Takena. Oh, well, you're on Facebook and, oh, well, there's two Takenas. Fantastic. Takena Fubara and Takena George. Super cool. So we got one of you on Facebook, one on YouTube, which is very cool. No more questions. Excellent. Okay, no more questions from Clive. Lovely. Thank you very much. Also from Isaac, no more questions. Excellent. And from Kathy, brilliant. And Maureen. So John and Maureen. Okay. It has been my pleasure to be able to hang out with you guys today, guys. It has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you also, Conrad and Imogen. Like I say, if you guys have enjoyed the stream, please give me a happy smiley face. Give me a like, give me a share, give me a smiley face in the chat box, because it's always nice to get the smiley face in the chat box and know that what I'm doing is working and giving you guys value for your evening. So, without further ado, I really, really appreciate all of your time. It has been absolutely wonderful to be able to spend the evening with you guys. I hope you guys have had some value. I look forward to seeing you guys again this time next week. Every Tuesday, 8 p.m., Property Channel, episode number 12 will be happening next week. It has been wonderful. Thank you guys, and see you all soon. Bye.